Alright, hello everybody, welcome back to me explaining my project. So last time we went over the game class, and I said we were going to go over this GUI handler, or graphical user interface handler, and that's located in our content GUIs, GUI. And this is the GUI handler. This one gets a little complicated, as you can see. It's a pretty long file, and this is just a common frame I needed, so I put it in a function of the GUI handler. So what we have here, it imports a reference to every GUI I will ever need and all I've created, sets it equal to a variable, and then deletes the import. This is something I had issues with importing these. It turned out to be something completely different, but I saw this on a Stack Overflow somewhere. I didn't really need to do it here, but I just decided that I started it. I had like 6 of them done, and I was like, oh, I might as well just keep it going. So the GUI class has a reference to the game. As you can see in our game class, we ran self as a parameter for the GUI handler initializer. It has an in frame window info variable, and that's width height xy. And that's used to create all of the GUIs and keep track of their location and size. And the previous index is something I use for the back option, and we'll get to that in a second. So remember in our game, when it was done initializing, it hit start. Basically, it starts the GUI handler, which sets our previous index equal to 0, of course. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. We have a current GUI variable now. We created a new one, and we get the we start a new main menu. We create a new main menu with game as a parameter. So let me explain that a little bit. This is the big list of GUIs right here. This is all the GUIs in the game. And if you see this main menu here, should have done this in an enumerator, I believe. Somehow enumeration would have helped, but I just put it right here. This is the dumbest thing. It's not the dumbest thing in the project, but it's pretty dumb. I was in a rush at this point, and I was just like, I'm just going to throw them all in a file, import it, and then use those names. So let's get our GUI back. So anytime you see self.GUIs, or it'll probably be self.game.GUIhandler.GUIs, and then the GUI that is the screen you want to switch to. And then self.game is a parameter on every single interface. And then it just runs the main loop of that GUI, and we'll get to main menu probably next video. I'll probably do a video on, I'll group the video, or the interfaces into separate videos, not for each one, but you know, unloading. All right, so this gets a little weird. When you save with Pickle, you cannot save a tkinter class, and all of these interfaces are tkinter classes. But I want to save my GUI handler object because it's in my game, and all I want to do is save the game object in the end. So what I need to do is unload them. So G gets the index of my current GUI. So it gets wherever I am here in this array. It puts that in this variable. It destroys the current GUI, empties out the self.GUIs list, so this is equal to nothing, so that we can save it. And it sets the current GUI to nothing, so that that variable also isn't equal to a GUI, because it would have been. And then we return G, and I call this in saving in the game. So we get our game file, we save it, and we set self.g, which is this variable that I talked about earlier that we'll talk about down here. And that unload GUIs will just return that current GUI value. We dump the game into the pickle file, and then we load the GUIs with that G. And when we load the GUI, we reset this big array, and then we start that the GUI that we left off with. So let me see if I can show you how this works, because you can see this function in action. Is it just right here? It's not the right one. Actually, that's probably more a recent version that I should be looking at. All right, so we start this. We have to get into here. If you hit S, you can see it flickers a little bit. It goes away and comes back up. It's really fast, but that's the GUI closing, and then the game saving, and then the GUI popping back up. And that's how I decided to save the game, with the tkinter classes and everything. This next method is probably the most useful method I ever wrote. Other pretty close is back as well. But for swap GUI, the flag, I'll talk about that in a second. So if the flag is 0, which it is by default, then we want to update our window info, or update W info. And down here it sets our self.windowInfo that I talked about earlier, and it gets the current GUIs width, height, X, and Y. So that'll save the window information, and then when we load a new GUI, let's see, I'll just pull one up. When we create a new one, we set the geometry equal to the GUI handler of the game's window info that we just changed. So that means, I can show this in action again. If I change the size of this and then go into a new window, it'll be the same size. Or if I move it around, it'll stay the same no matter where I go. I just thought that was a fun little thing to add, so I did it. End of the day, didn't need it, but I put it in there anyway. So we set the previous index of this GUI handler equal to the index of the current GUI. So we're just saying the previous index is this one. We destroy it, and then we create a new one based off of this new variable that's passed in. That's the index in this array of where we want to go, which sometimes we don't know, right? Like if you can level up in the arena, you can level up in combat, but that's where the back function comes in handy later. And then every time you swap a GUI, you bind the key to the self.game.save. So in game.save, it's an event, and if the character is S, then that's when we save. And then it runs the main loop of that new GUI. So that swaps the GUI out. So it destroys the old one, makes a new one based on what the call says to make the new one. And the flag is, when the flag would be 1, is like the level up screen is really tiny, so I didn't want to have to update the window info. So I just made sure that if I swapped to the level up screen or back from it, I should have called it update in both places, but that's okay. That I didn't want to update the window information based off of the level up thing. I believe the arena is also smaller, the arena and the other challenge shops. Back is another useful one. It destroys the current one and just sets the current one equal to the previous index, so it just goes back. That's useful for just, I have a player inventory screen in multiple places. I'll show you that real quick. Load this. So I can get to my inventory from here, and there's a back button. And I can also get to my inventory from here, and it goes back to here, not back to the town screen, and this one goes back to here, not the dungeon screen. So I needed that back option so that I could always just get back, because from the player inventory, it's the same screen, it's the same GUI, and I don't know where necessarily I'm going to go if I hit back. I could have hard-coded that with if statements, but I thought this was better. Now this add player info, which you see is a big file, or a big method, is because that creates, I'll show you here, it creates this with the name and all the information. And I put that in the GUI handler because I needed it, well, here, first of all. I needed it here. I needed it here. I needed it here. I needed it everywhere. I needed it in the combat, so couldn't get away. We got away, boys. I needed it I think that's about it. Anyway, you get the deal. I needed it a lot, so I just put it in the GUI handler so that I could access it from everywhere. And that's pretty much the whole GUI handler. It was one of the more complicated things I had to do. Handling graphical interfaces. Graphical user interfaces isn't the easiest thing, especially when you're working with tkinter. Yeah, this whole project was just a big wrestle with tkinter. So thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe if you're interested in seeing more of how this project works, and I will see you next time.